Welcome to the famous or forgotten podcast, The Making or Missing of Great Artists. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition, I guess we can call it, episode of the famous or forgotten podcast, where we are going to debrief one of our previously recorded episodes, pick out lessons and all of that. I'm Sean Swaim, joined by my co-hosts in this episode, Alex and Mary. Welcome.
Hey, Sean.
Hey.
All right. This episode, we have the pleasure of dissecting, debriefing, deconstructing, reconstructing the conversation that Alex and I had with Bill Valerio of the Woodmere Museum in Philadelphia-ish area, Chestnut Hill. I guess it's technically Philadelphia. But some really cool conversations came out of that right out of the gate. The intro of the episode, we talk what Bill talks about is New York as the art hub of the world. What were your guys' impressions of that?
I think that's pretty consistent with what we've heard in the past. I mean, you have really after World War II, it shifted from Europe to the US, mainly to New York. And really, I mean, it seems like we've talked with other people in the industry that have said there's other art centers, but really it's, kind of New York or bust if you're trying to make it as an artist, at least maybe until now, potentially, and that's up for debate.
Yeah, definitely.
I wasn't surprised when he kind of said New York was the epicenter. I thought it was interesting when he talked about, though, the difference between like the culture in New York versus Philadelphia, and how New York is like that much more commercial hub. With the galleries, whereas Philadelphia has kind of its own culture that's very much not around the commercial side of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was the very next note that I wrote down on my sheet here was the educational mindset versus the what Bill referred to as the mercantile mindset that New York had, and Bill, being as brilliant as Bill is, dove into, historically, New York is a Dutch culture. Philadelphia is culturally English. So it's, kind of that little dynamic there I thought was personally really, really interesting. I'd love both of your thoughts on, obviously a lot of that comes from the perspective of post-World War II America. I'd be interested in your thoughts on, and I know Bill touched on this and we're going to get to it in a little bit, but your thoughts on, do you think that's still true that New York is the art hub of the world?
I think so. And I think mainly it's because it seems like there's art centers, and they tend to happen where there's a lot of wealth, concentrated wealth.
Yeah.
New York is definitely a place of concentrated wealth. Now, are there arts in other, are there those same type of hubs in other parts of the world now? Absolutely. But just from a U.S. standpoint, there was, I forget which dealer said this, but they basically said, if you want to show, you have to be in New York. Mm-hmm. In the book that Sean, you and I were recommended to read called Boom, that seems to be a consistent theme there, that it's New York because the large galleries are there, the dealers are there, whether they live there or they have a presence there.
Right.
And that's from the mid-century media, Castelli area of Gagosian area. Like these are the people that are moving art around, that are getting people introduced to art. Because of Warner, for example. Actually, I don't know if he's in New York. I'm sure he has a presence there. If we're talking big money art, it seems like it has to be in the places where the hubs are, where the connectors are. And that's a large portion of the conversation with Bill was these, people that will open doors for you, your connectors. So that's my take. What about you, Mary? What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with all of that. I think part of it comes down to just like the number of galleries in New York, and like that is like such a big part of it there. Because I think Bill even said, like, when you're looking at like the art history in Philadelphia, you focus more on like the trajectory of the schools and like the art schools there, whereas New York, you look at the history and the trajectory of the galleries. And I think that just kind of put it into perspective for me of like, okay, like New York is the hub of the galleries. And so if you're an artist who wants to have a partnership, that relationship with the gallery show, like have someone invest in you in that way, I think New York is definitely the place to do that then.
For sure. Yeah, it's really funny. And I guess I didn't necessarily pick it up while we were there recording it. But I picked it up in a re-listen about, the first American art institution was in Philadelphia. It's like, man, if that doesn't like bake into your DNA culturally as a city, I don't know what does.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was interesting how he talked about, like, I think a lot of the other people that you've talked to and a lot of what we've been talking about is how like whether location can like make or break an artist. And I thought it was interesting how he kind of mentioned another side of things where like the location and like the history of a location influences even the kind of art that's going to be made in that location. Like how he's saying like, yeah, there's the first art institute there, and how Philadelphia was like really had this like realist dimension that like was really grappling with like what it meant to be in America, and like this kind of like what like detailed look at like what's in front of you. I think I remember him saying, which was really interesting, and even that like illustration component, and how that just kind of the type of art even was different because of the location versus like New York, which had a bit of a different like take on things.
Yeah, I can see that. If all of the artists, professional artists around you, I guess you would consider like a professional or who had made it their career to be an artist, around you are educators, it seems like that it is in Philly, then that's your circle, right? And they may introduce you to their colleagues, their students. In New York, there's countless stories of dealers stumbling upon new emerging artists from other artists that those artists are friends with. And so that's your circle. So if you're in a circle of artists that's getting paid a lot of money for their artwork, it seems like you're a lot closer to be found and recognized than if you're in a city where it's not as commercial or more based on education and theory and things like that, as opposed to showing.
All about those connections.
Yeah. This is kind of an obscure connection, but kind of related at the same time. Alex, you and I had the pleasure of having one of the best dinners I've ever had in my life with a chef that we thought was Michelin rated, but it turned out that he wasn't or isn't. And when asked about it, like, well, what's the process for that? And he just flat out said, well, they just don't come here. That, oh, that's that's it. So it's almost like, again, like just I'm always looking for those connections of like, yeah, your location kind of matters if you want a certain distinction.
That's a perfect location. Yes, he was located outside of DC.
Yep.
Or is located outside of DC. Has had a number of restaurants and like absolutely delicious, right? And we thought that he was a Michelin star rated chef, and certainly had the background for it in terms of his training. Definitely had the delivery. But they literally don't visit that area. And it's like, if the dealers don't go to Philly,
right?
Yeah.
Or it's like the main heavy hitters don't go to Philly, then you're never going to get a Michelin star.
Right. Yeah,
that's a great, I think that's a great connection.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Even like Michelin stars only like came to Canada like 2 years ago. So
oh, wow.
Like, it was a big thing here in Toronto. So
you also
you
also just got cars up there too. I mean, it was all bobsleds and huskies.
Yeah.
Until recently. So.
The Great White North.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another interesting thing that it was a big chunk of the conversation. It felt quick during the recording, but now listening back to it, it was like, okay, I listened to it twice because it was like, okay, there's a lot of layers to this. And it's the conversation around ecosystems and how museums play a role, galleries play a role, auctions play a role, dealers play a role, all of that. Just the super high level question, and then we'll dig in. What were some of your first impressions of that conversation?
Mary, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I found it actually really helpful on like understanding just kind of more how the art world works, because like I knew there were all these different components, but I didn't like really know what role each of them played. So I found that really helpful, how we broke it down, how like what the like mission of museums is versus galleries. And yeah, I thought it was interesting how, there's this whole ecosystem, and kind of depending on like as an artist, depending on kind of where you want to take your art, you might go different directions with it. That was just kind of my first impressions of that.
Yeah, he spent a lot of time talking about the role that museum plays. And I think that he was giving himself enough padding to kind of, to say what he needed to confidently. But really, it seems like it depends what kind of museum you are. Like, obviously, MoMA, like if you get shown in MoMA or in their private or in their permanent collection, that can make you as an artist.
Sure.
But a lot of other museums, they're really there to help tell stories in the context of things and not necessarily to sell the work. So I think it's interesting. They play this role of kind of being involved in the success of an artist, but indirectly through association, as opposed to through direct influence, I guess, such as
Definitely.
like a major gallery or a dealer would. So yeah, it's interesting. There's also the whole ecosystem of, he mentioned that Philadelphia is not part of the international ecosystem for art, right? New York is, and but because Philadelphia is not involved, even the museums there, I guess, play a different role.
Definitely.
And maybe the let's say the opportunities that museums get are different in Philadelphia than they are in New York, whether it's the work that they get, the financial contributions that they get, right? It's a different game.
Yeah. Yeah, and to your point, I think that's a brilliant distinction, Alex. And the thought that comes to mind to me is like, think about like what. So you have Philadelphia Art Museum and MoMA. You know what I mean? The big museum in each of those cities. Like MoMA, like there are original Jackson Pollocks there, famous halls in that they bring some of the biggest exhibits in the world go through MoMA. Like that's where they go. And then like the Philadelphia Art Museum, what's it famous for? The Rocky Balboa statue out front. You know what I mean? Like that's like, that's not a shot at, you know, like I've been to the Philadelphia Art Museum many times and there's amazing work in there, but like you think about the prestige and like kind of global knowledge of it, like that's kind of what they're known for.
If a Rocky movie can take the most iconic part of a museum, right, then yeah, I guess that kind of tells you about the culture. I mean, and that's perfect. Rocky for Philadelphia, it's perfect, right? And it's like, I wouldn't have it any other way. Yeah. But as an artist, which environment do you want to play in?
That's exactly right. Yep. That's exactly it.
Interesting. Yeah, I think you also touched on the art events, which I think are really important as an artist or just anyone in the industry. These events, I guess, kind of like in most industries, you have the big conferences that, like, you know, anyone who's anyone big in the industry is going to be there, and you want to plan your meetings with them in advance. It's kind of the same thing with these events, right? He mentioned Art Basel. He mentioned there's the Armory show in New York City. I guess finding a way to get associated with those shows, whether you're being represented there by someone, a dealer that's going there, or just going yourself and getting a sense of the scene, like that may be something that's worth doing to get into the ecosystem, because there's going to be a lot of people there. And it seems like a lot of the heavy hitters have early access before the general public gets in. But either way, if you're talking about being in the right circles, giving yourself the best opportunity to be found, even if you're not in the right city, that may be an event that you shell out for and go to and find a way to stand out.
Absolutely. Again, just circling back to putting yourself in the environment, which Mary said earlier, like if you're, you know, you got to put yourself there.
Yeah. Got to just find your in for the ecosystem. Get in there.
Yeah. And something else that I wanted to touch on, I guess loosely tied to ecosystems, but if the museum, depending on what the museum is, their goal is to tell a certain story. And that story it could be a retrospective about a specific artist. It could be about a certain period of time. For example, it seems like it's very hard to get your own retrospective.
Sure.
But by association, you could get connected with other artists that, you know, within like the abstract expressionist movement that happened even just in Philadelphia, like Woodmere Museum had the show for Group 55. Finding a way to be maybe a big fish in a smaller pond could potentially give you the, you know, more attention and the attention that could potentially then take you to the next level. So finding a way to, you know, become a lead in any of those stories that are being told, I think is important, and something that is kind of underlining in some of the stuff that, some of the insights that Bill was sharing.
Definitely. Yeah. And, you know, that to piggyback off of that, one of the things that Bill outlined was, and Mary started this a few minutes ago. I'm just going to basically steal what Mary said and just word it a little differently. But the mission of a museum is to tell stories in a way that draw people to the museum. The gallery's role is to tell the story of specific artists so that artist sells more.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think what you're saying, Alex, is, if you're an artist and you're looking for avenues of how do I stand out in a crowd, knowing that that's the kind of culture between galleries and museums, then you play your part in that, in each of those, depending on which route you're going.
Yeah. I thought another point Bill made, which was interesting, is he mentioned how, like, I think another difference here is that, like, museums, like, can offer validation, and that, like, they are, making judgments on, like, who they're including in their collections and their exhibitions and whatnot. So they can kind of offer an artist validation of, like, this artist did something really interesting in this area that we haven't seen before. Like, they're a really key part of this story that we're telling. Whereas, like, a gallery is also offering validation, but also almost like more than that. They're like, we're investing in you specifically. And we're going to provide further marketing of, like, just you, not this greater story that you may be a part of. There's a little bit of a nuance there. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like both are needed. So you have someone like Bechtel that's in 76 different museums. They had that part of, by association, part of the abstract art movement in Philadelphia, but he's also in museums all over the United States, as we've seen, right? So it's not limited to just the U.S., just Philadelphia, but then the marketing piece was there. So the association was there, and I agree with you, Mary. You need both aspects of that. There was this, I guess the museum provides the historical significance or association to a moment in history, and you're one of relevance and two, significance to it. And then it's on the gallery or the dealer to then create ripples and really magnify that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think it's interesting with Bechtel is how he's in so many museums. So he has that validation of, like, your art was good enough and like a part of this abstract expressionism movement, and you were, like, a key player here. But I wonder if, because he also, like, was, like, disillusioned with the commercialization of art and then, like, stopped selling and exhibiting his art, so he has that museum validation, but he never got the more commercial validation, even though his art was deemed good enough. So that's interesting how he has kind of that one piece of the puzzle, but not the other.
Yeah, that's one of the notes that he mentioned that I jotted down was the galleries can be your best champion. We spent quite a bit of time talking about champions in the conversation and that concept. And just to add some context and flavor to this, when did we record this, Alex? 2 months ago?
About that, yeah.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of subsequent conversations, reading, research, and all that done here. So kind of a funny point, like some of the questions that we're asking that are pre all of this research. Like, it's just kind of like a funny thing to listen to. Like the bonehead question I asked, like, hey, do you have an example of a gallery making someone famous? And it's like, I'm just happy he didn't laugh at me. But
that's also relevant for the listeners, right? As an artist that's coming, let's say you're an artist, you decided that this is your passion. Do you know that? Do you know the answer of that question? Do you know which
Yep.
galleries or museums to look at, or any examples of, case studies?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, there's an interesting. Bill was the first person I've heard, that I remember anyway, that mentioned about how art historians can also be a whole other layer of validation that can essentially add to the lore of an artist.
What do you mean?
yeah. And like, I think he also mentioned like art critics then maybe picking that up as
Yes.
well.
Yep.
And I guess that can be kind of a big piece of an artist who's deceased. Like,
Yep.
maybe that's actually a bigger factor for those artists, of maybe a historian picks you up along the way or something. Yeah.
Interesting.
That's a great connection. No, the example that he gave was Van Gogh, where, he's the famous starving artist. Then all of a sudden now he's got the most expensive work on the planet. But yeah, that idea of get a famous historian to say, hey, this is something.
Yeah. I thought
Go ahead.
I just thought the other interesting piece with Van Gogh that Bill mentioned was how it was like subsequent generations of artists that kind of kept like remembering him, or like found that meaning in his work and kind of kept it alive enough for like the galleries to kind of catch up. So I think it's interesting now. I kind of was thinking about how now with like digital age, social media, you can keep someone's memory alive, like we're trying to do with Bechdel. And so it's like, maybe that ends up inspiring like other generations of artists and kind of brings it more about that way.
That's a great point, Mary. And
Seems
then,
go ahead.
I was just going to make a quick point that like then it's artists acting as champions for each other. The one, and especially the ones that aren't around anymore in the Van Gogh case.
That's a great point. It's it seems like take Sam Feinstein and his work, and he was always an educator.
Yeah.
And it seems that the work that Pat, his wife, is doing now that Sam's no longer around is she's trying to show how much of a influence he was and how many artists he trained and spread his teachings to, or his methods to. And I guess, if it's that deep, then do they carry the torch? And we had Barbara Rolanen talk about Arthur B. Carl's, and that actually Sam Feinstein was a student of Arthur B. Carl's. So it's interesting. I think, I guess would the artists who are carrying the torch, their reason to do so would be that they learn some type of maybe either method, mindset, some type of approach from the previous artist that they're now referencing in their work and carrying forward.
Right.
And maybe in order to get that, you would have to do something unique, something novel that then you felt so strongly about that you either created a lot of it or you taught that method or mindset or whatever it was to others, and then it carried on. And then are the art historians looking back now see, and they connect the dots of like, oh wow, look at this. It's kind of like, almost like a, like lineage.
I think that kind of plays into also what Bill was talking about of like how so much of this and like being known as an artist is this like social component of building relationships within this ecosystem. And I think maybe especially in Philadelphia where like education was a prime thing, like these artists are going to be living on through just like the relationships that they have formed with their students or like people they have mentored. And that's kind of how they can become, I guess, like more embedded in the ecosystem. Like if you're able to like share art and pass that on to someone while you're alive, I would hope that they would then want to like carry on remembering you in some way or like letting people know the impact you had. Yeah.
If there was a map,
and again,
just thinking, if there was a map, so let's say that take Arthur B. Carles, for example. You have Arthur B. Carles, who Barbara Willamon, our historian, did her thesis for her PhD about Arthur B. Carles, said that he was the pioneer of abstract expressionism. Take him and his teachings, who were his students, and then map that out. Who were their students, right? So, Feinstein learned from Carles. A lot of artists learned from Feinstein. And now, potentially, if along that map, you have a famous, you have a famous painter, and you're like, wait a minute, this was their predecessor. This was, they were like an apprentice of sorts to this artist or this mindset. I mean, you would essentially, you'd be put on the map. You just need to create that connection.
Yeah, that would be, I feel like a really interesting, like historical project, almost like an artist, like family tree, like kind of like a genealogy, like map. Like that would be really cool.
That would be cool. Maybe we can get Barbara to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, she doesn't have anything else going on. Let's just
that's right. Yeah, she's completely free with her time.
And again, me and my dot connecting in other places, like, and then I have a follow-up, like, kind of thought to this too that might be kind of interesting to discuss. And again, us being totally unqualified to have any of these kind of conversations, but it's like you see it in other realms of the world where it's, guitar playing, for example. It's like somebody paved the way for certain techniques and sounds that a guitar can make. It's like, okay, that, somebody figured this out and they started doing it. And then the next generation goes through and they're doing it. And then they're always saying like, oh yeah, I loved this guy. Like Eddie Van Halen is a great example of it, like finger tapping. He didn't invent it, but he made it famous. So it's like this certain technique called finger tapping where it's like, okay, he did it, made it famous. And now everybody is doing it. And now we're on to like the third generation where they're doing it. And this is where my hypothetical question comes in. Is there a certain point of notoriety where it's like, yeah, that second generation always shouted back. They always said, oh man, because he started doing it, I had to do it. Now it's like, as you get into the third, fourth, fifth generation, do these people even know that that's where that came from? You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it kind of got like it's almost
just
like
a technique.
super.
Yeah.
It's
like the norm.
Yeah, exactly.
It kind of just comes down to like, have you done your research or not?
Right.
Yeah.
Do you respect your, and like guitar playing came to mind first for me, but I mean, like, it exists in cooking and, like the celebrity chef world. It exists in like, it exists in everything where these pioneers created these techniques.
Yeah. It's kind of like that, like meme where it's like, if you're wearing a band shirt of like an older band and like someone will come up to you and be like, well, name 5 songs. And like kids these days like won't know. Yeah. And it's kind of that thing of like, yeah, have you done the research, like know the greats of like what you're promoting or doing, or are you just like hopping on the bandwagon a little bit?
Which,
I guess
for the record, I am that guy.
Yeah.
I see a young kid wearing a Led Zeppelin shirt, like, name 3 songs, Stairway to Heaven doesn't count. Yeah. Grouchy old man I've become.
Yeah.
I guess it just becomes a norm, becomes tools that people have and they use. But I wonder if for people who, let's say, do finger tapping as like, they're just like, this is in my toolbox. Like, I know how to use this. It sounds good for this particular moment. If they were shown that this is the person that made this famous, that put this on the map, would that have an effect? Would that increase their, like, oh wow, they created it, or like they made it famous? Now, does it bring the attention back?
Yeah.
And that's where the marketing piece comes in, right? Like it's the same thing. There was like, what was it? The Bissell and Revere, right? Do you know the story with like delivering like the British are coming? It was actually Bissell who delivered the message that the British are coming. But in the story, Revere sounded much better than I think it was Israel Bissell, right? And so I was listening to some podcast, or maybe it was a book, and someone was like, it sounds like a Jewish vacuum cleaner, right? It's like, it didn't flow with the narrative. So they changed the name to Revere, and everyone knows Revere. No one knows Bissell. I mean, outside of the vacuum, right? But like, no one knows that it was actually him who delivered the message. And so history is all in how it's written, not necessarily in how it's happened. And that's the marketing piece of it.
Yeah. Well, that even goes back to what Bill was saying right at the beginning of the podcast of, the like American art history that we like know or told is written is like from the New York perspective.
Yeah.
Like, we don't like the perspectives of like Philadelphia is not like prioritized or highlighted in the art history that is like circulated widely.
Because that's the marketing that was done.
That's the marketing. Yeah. Well, great full circle there.
Yeah, that was a great full circle.
Yeah.
What else you got for us, Sean?
Yeah, I'm getting to it. So one of the other things that I think was an interesting conversation was the conversation around the quality of the work. And Alex, I don't know if you remember, but I mentioned to you right after we recorded it that I was like, that part of the conversation was kind of awkward. And then rewatching it, it was 10 times more awkward watching it, where, my joke that I kind of made, I don't remember if it was during or after, but it was like, I don't have personally any technique as a visual artist. Like, I just don't have it. But I might have ideas. I might have something to say. And if I try to create something that expresses something, no matter what way you dissect it, it's not going to look good. But it seemed like Bill is of the opinion, and this is not a shot at Bill by any stretch of the imagination, so please don't take it that way. But the idea that Bill expressed was that it's more important for an artist to express themselves versus the technical quality of the work. So I don't know if you two remember that. I don't know if we want to cut this part out, but what were your impressions of... Oh, and I'm sorry, to lay the framework of it a little bit deeper. One of the questions that we have is, obviously marketing is a big part of it, but is there a baseline for how good the work has to be before it can be marketed?
It's a tough one.
it seems like, all right, so there's quality in the sense of quality materials, which is not what you're asking. And then there's quality in terms of like the craftsmanship.
What you see on the canvas.
Yeah, what you see on the canvas. And it just listening through the insights from the book, it seems like that's not the main thing. It's are you marketable? And it kind of brings me back to, and this is going to be a whatever connection it is, but in Entourage, Vinny asks Ari, "Do you think I'm a good actor?" And he responds with, "Vinny, I think you're a movie star." And if you like in Boom, it goes through from after World War II, what happened in art and the major artists that led a movement. And each of them was a personality. Pollock, right?
Oh.
Pollock was always getting drunk at bars and was rowdy and getting things started. Like everyone knew him because he was out there.
Volatile
individual. Big, right? Like you knew his presence. Then you had Warhol. What a personality that was, and then changed the game, right? And then the artists that followed. You had blanking on the name, but anyways, you have all these artists that have major personalities and stood out at that time, and they were, they had the presence to carry that movement or to carry their art forward, and so does the quality matter? Probably not as much, and so a lot of it is marketing and personality.
Yeah, great distinction, Alex.
Yeah, I think the tough thing about art too is that like you can have like, I think there are like, people who are going to be better at techniques than others, like just like at a skill level. But like what it comes down to for popularity is just like people's subjective opinions of like, are they drawn to your art or not?
Right.
Like, do they enjoy your art or not? And everyone's going to have a different opinion on that. But what I thought was interesting is how, like, I think Bill said, this might have been earlier on in the episode, where he's talking about abstract expressionism. And I think he said something along the lines of like pieces that like have like expression in them, which like had me thinking, because I think a lot of people, especially with like abstract art, will be like, oh, well, I could do that. I could like throw some paint on a canvas and like make something of it. Like it doesn't seem that hard technically, but I think the point is that it's like if it can evoke a feeling, I think that's probably more like meaningful or like worth more to people than like, is it technically good? Because like I've seen like or watched like a technically beautiful movie or something like that, or like it's like technically perfect, like looks amazing, but it's like not making me feel anything. Like at the end of the day, people like their favorite movies are the ones that like really made them feel something or like stuck with them, or like they were there when they were a kid, not like the most technical, great, like gorgeous looking film ever.
Absolutely. Yeah. I believe Bill referred to that as the intersection of spirituality and art.
Yeah.
Where it's like you feel something in you. And that, and that's, I think, noteworthy of this conversation is that, there's that element to it where it's, I'm not going to be able to contribute anything more thoroughly than you just did, Mary. I think your example is spot on. That it's like, I'm trying to think of an example of a movie that like I love, but probably is technically not a great movie. But but I've only seen like a dozen movies in my whole life. So
there's this quote that I have on one of my whiteboards in front of me. It says, "People remember how you made them feel, not what you said." And that's like that. Like you can technically paint it in the, most professional or the right way, whatever that means. But if it doesn't feel, and the feeling that you have for a piece of art could potentially be in a complete vacuum. You may have just seen this painting for the first time. It doesn't have a nameplate on it. You have no idea what it's about, but it makes you feel a certain way. But in most cases, it's going to have, especially if it's abstract, it's going to have some kind of nameplate on it. It's going to have some historical significance to it or something that you can connect with. And then maybe you'll feel more from it, having known kind of the gist of it. And especially if it's from an artist whose personality, I guess you already know, potentially. If you already know kind of what they stood for, then that has an influence on how that art makes you feel.
Definitely.
Well, even like in the podcast, I think part of Bill's answer to this was that there's no objective quality that's gonna guarantee that your artwork is like loved or famous or anything like that. Like what matters is that people have a relationship to it, and that like the artist like has relationships with people who like have relationships with their art. And so it does kind of come down to this factor of just like subjective marketability in a way.
Yeah. I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction, but a long time, let's say pre-World War II, before we had very good communication systems. So if there was a message or there was a really good artist, maybe they were just in their local area and they weren't maybe well known outside of that. Maybe quality of work and craftsmanship mattered more then, because someone may look at that. Like, for example, there was one of the paintings that Dali did it's so small, and the amount of detail and the crispness that he was able to get on such a small canvas was, it showed the great craftsmanship there, right? Or you look at the sculptures that Michelangelo did, right? There's amazing craftsmanship there. Fast forward to now where there's a brand behind everything, right? Everything that's marketed has a brand. It has something that it stands for. It has a personality, or it has a brand persona. Each artist, when you think about them now, you have some sort of persona to them, like how were they like when they were alive or now. And so maybe then the quality doesn't necessarily matter as long as the quality of the message or whatever it stood for is big enough to carry it. And now with what's going on now with artificial intelligence, quality, everyone has quality now at their fingertips, right? Like you could create any type of artwork that you want without any craftsmanship and then have it printed. And so what happens now? And I don't necessarily have an answer to this, but this just, it maybe quality was important at one point, but now there's a different type of quality. Maybe it's not the quality of craftsmanship, but it's a quality of something else.
The quality of the meaning. Quality of
maybe
the
it's
feeling.
that.
Yeah, I think there is, like, with quality, I think there is level of, like, if you can do something that makes people go, like, whoa, like, how did you do that?
Yeah.
Then, that's going to help you significantly. But we are at a point where, like, there's so many people and so much access to so many different technologies, mediums, everything, that you kind of have to go back around and be like, okay, how do I make this like more like meaningful, more like human, to differentiate myself from maybe like all the AI generated stuff that's going on. Yeah. It seems like everyone has access to great AI except for the royal family and their photoshopping.
So again, this is actually a perfect segue, and this may be a good conversation to kind of round things out with. This has been a fun conversation. This was an amazing episode. We could probably spend another hour digging through this, but I think one of the points that I wanted to kind of have us try to touch on with this is, a museum is a place where you can go and just be in the presence of the feeling of this art. And an amazing curator and museum like the Woodmere and what Bill Valerio was doing there, that story is there and you can get pulled into it. And that's what makes the place so amazing. One of the questions that, Alex and I know you and I have talked in depth about this, the digital presence of it, we can see, you mentioned Dali a few minutes ago, you can see his work, any of his work. Like you just Google the name of it and boom, the image of it is there on your screen. I don't know if either of you two have had the privilege of seeing his work in person, but like I saw it, man, in
Philadelphia.
There was an exhibit of his in Philadelphia maybe 10, 15 years ago or so.
A while ago.
And, you're in the lobby in line getting ready to go in. It's buzzy. Everyone's pumped. And then you get in there and it's just stunned silence. And it's just like you're in the presence of history or amazing, like whatever you want to call it. Like, but it's just like, it takes the wind out of you being in front of this work. So it's like, and the point of me mentioning this is the role of the visibility that can be gained digitally and how things can be spread. But circling back to that feeling, like, is that really something that can only be experienced when you're standing in front of a piece?
Yeah, I think it is. Because, like, I think digitally and online, it's like, it just is more focused on, like, the marketing. Like, it's focused on, like, keeping your attention for, like, as long as possible. Like, it's a very kind of, like, and saying this as someone who's, like, grown up on the internet, like, it's a very, like, frantic kind of, like, addictive space. Like, it's always moving. It's like always wanting the next thing, the next trend. And that's what I love about like spaces like museums is they create an atmosphere where you can actually like just take in a single thing for as long as you want, like in silence. Like they create an atmosphere that just like allows for that and kind of like makes you want to like take in the full feeling of a piece. Whereas like, if you're scrolling on Instagram, it's impossible to only take in one thing at a time and sit with it. Like it's just not possible. So I think there is just like a limit to like how much you can appreciate it in a digital space. And physically you see like the brush strokes, the texture, the colors are going to be different than on your screen. Like there's just a whole, I think the digital space is great for the marketing, but it places limitations on like how much you can appreciate it, I guess. Yeah.
There's, so what you described with Dali is there was a stage presence that you like connected to like artists. You can hear a song 100 times. And then you get to a concert where that artist is on and they're performing it live. And it's just, even when that artist just steps on stage, if they have it, right, there's a stage presence there that just chills down your spine.
Yep.
And because you're in, like you said, Sean, like you're in the presence of greatness or significance or this, something historical or whatever it is. And I think that compared with the experience, the story that's told, whereas just like scrolling on Instagram or TikTok, you get fragments of a story in isolation. But in a museum, if done properly, it's a curated experience of a story where things connect, and you may see that painting, especially if it's a historically significant painting, you may experience it differently because of what painting was to the left of it, to the right of it, and that whole progression has been carefully organized. And I think that, to Woodmere's mission is to create experiences with the art and artists of Philadelphia. One of the main points of that is, outside of the Philadelphia piece, is experiences. They want to create an experience. And what do we get from experiences? We get nostalgia, right? We get and that only happens because and there's something with an experience, there's deeply rooted things that then will bring you back to something significant that you experienced that left a lasting impression on you.
Absolutely. All right, let's round it out with any final thoughts. Anything that we may have missed covering.
I'm just excited as we learn more, when we start diving in, to really see, I don't know, maybe it'll start peeling back the onion on what the future of art looks like when everyone can be the best artist in the world through a text prompt.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm just excited to listen to more and learn more. It was kind of interesting listening to this episode, which was earlier on after having learned some. So doing that back and forth, I feel like was good reflection for my own knowledge. So I'm excited to keep doing that.
Agreed. Yeah, that was my biggest personal takeaway too. Just hearing the questions that we asked, and now kind of knowing what we know now. I agree, Mary. Amazing reflection opportunity, and even just the generosity of Bill. Bill didn't have to agree to do this. You know what I mean? Just the generosity of him with his time. Being a perfect gentleman with two guys that don't know anything about anything, and being willing to share and educate and all of that. I think that speaks volumes to the quality of human that Bill is. So
absolutely,
agreed.
Yeah, that's who he is, and I think he's in a great role there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's round this out. If you happen to be in the Philadelphia area, please make sure you check out the Woodmere Museum. Check out their website, see the cool things that they're doing. Click around, see some of the past exhibits. That was something that, sorry, I'm adding another note here. In doing some of the looking back at the Woodmere website for the Group 55 exhibit, just the references that they put in there, where it was there was an article in the Inquirer about the presence of abstract expressionism in Philadelphia, just the lengths that they go to make sure that the full story is told. So I can't speak highly of the Woodmere enough. So they got a fan out of this at the very least. But thank you all for tuning in and hearing our dissection of this. We hope you found it valuable. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Famous or Forgotten podcast. On behalf of Alex and Mary and myself, thank you all. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Famous or Forgotten podcast. We hope you found it insightful, educational, entertaining, and everything else that goes into a great podcast. We are always looking for folks to provide insights into this conversation around artists and what makes them succeed or not. If you feel like you have some insights to provide to this show, feel free to check the podcast notes below, or if you're watching on YouTube, in the show description. Our contact information is there. You can get in touch, and we'd love to start the conversation with you and allow you to provide any kind of insights that you think might be helpful. Stay tuned, and we'll see you on the next episode.